Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Polls show a majority of conservative evangelical Trump supporters have found ways to stand by their man, even amid scandals from multiple allegations of sexual misconduct to the alleged hush money paid to Stormy Daniels, the porn star who says that she had an affair with Trump in 2006, just after Trump's third wife, Melania, gave birth to his fifth child. One wonders just what will be in those Easter Sunday sermons this morning. And joining me now is religious reform activist Frank Schaeffer. He's the author of the book, Why I Am an Atheist Who Believes in God. And Frank, thank you for being here. Happy Easter to you. And you wrote a piece that is titled, This Easter, America's Evangelicals No Longer Believe in the Risen Lord, but in the alt reality of their porn star prez. Please do explain, sir.
Well, thank you, Joy, and happy Easter to you, too. And what I would say is that I grew up in the religious right. I was a religious right activist in the 70s and 80s with my father, Francis Schaeffer, who was one of the founders of the religious right along with Jerry Falwell. And back in those days, long before I left the religious right and became a progressive activist who tends to vote for Democratic candidates these days, our emphasis was on personal morality and accountability. And of course, everything has changed now. And what has happened is that evangelicals have folded the belief that Trump has been given to America by God into their theology. So you can no more argue with an evangelical today about his presidency or whether he is a good person or should be president or what he does or his brutality or his lies and convince them of it. You'd have the same difficulty as you would in arguing them out of a theological position. What secular observers don't realize is this has become a matter of theology for evangelicals. And as such, all the political arguments, in fact, facts themselves, do not apply. Evangelicals are absolutists. They don't believe in paradox. You know, you mentioned my book, Why I'm an Atheist Who Believes in God. That title denotes a sense that there is paradox in this world and that people who are certainty addicts tend to do bad things. For instance, I've never heard of anybody blowing up an abortion clinic or a white police officer shooting a black man or someone bombing a mosque after they shout, "But I could be wrong." And that's the problem with evangelicals today. They never think about the alternative. And so since Trump has been accepted as part of their absolutist theology, there's no arguing with it. And that is why they're going to support him to the bitter end.
And to your point, if you look at the polling, a new Pew poll on Trump's approval rating, white evangelicals stand out among even other religious people. White mainline Protestants net support Trump, but it's more almost 50-50. Black Protestants overwhelmingly oppose, including black evangelicals, and Catholics, sort of almost 60-40 are against Donald Trump. Why is it that white evangelicals, if everyone has the same sort of core theological basis, are alone in being so absolutely supportive of Donald Trump despite all of his flaws?
Well, it's not just the white evangelicals. The conservative Roman Catholics like Laura Ingraham, for instance, she had me on her show a few years ago when I had written a book about my son being in the Marine Corps. So she thought I must be more conservative than I am because I respect military service. But look at her. She's a convert to Catholicism. And here we are culminating in Easter, and she chooses this time to mock a teenager who stood up against gun violence. Juxtapose that with the last thing you had on this program before talking to me, and that was a report on Pope Francis. Here's someone who had breast cancer, who survived it, Laura Ingraham did, saying after she had breast cancer that she was going to re-examine her life and dedicate herself to higher things. Look at the fall that she has taken, now a poster child for imitating Donald Trump's ugly intolerance. Imagine that in Holy Week, at the time when Christians around the world are saying he is risen. Truly he is risen, answers the other Christian. And who do we hate next, is the evangelical or conservative Roman Catholic view, to the point of mocking kids who stand against violence. Think about that, Joy. That's where we are. The mentality today is we follow Trump not just into the gutter with his porn star presidency and the filth of his own past life and his mob connections and the rest of it. We even now find these leaders following him into the intolerance where it is okay in their view to mock a teen who stands on violence. That's where we are this Easter morning. So when saying Happy Easter, it's not a happy Easter. We are in a moment of betrayal of the teaching of Jesus that was the watershed. I speak of this as a Christian, the watershed in the ethical development of human consciousness that put your neighbor first and lifted humility up as something to be admired. We have an arrogant president who disrespects people, and those who follow him are now imitating this vile behavior in Holy Week and at Easter, no less. That's where America is this Easter morning.
And I have to play, on that note, Jerry Falwell Jr., who styles himself as I believe, as a Christian, as an evangelical. He would, I believe, consider himself to be a moral man. This is him on CNN on Wednesday. This is post the Stormy Daniels interview, and then talking about Donald Trump and throwing Bill Clinton in.
I still go back to the issues. I think we, just like with Bill Clinton, many of his supporters stuck with him no matter what he was accused of, even rape, I believe he was accused of, and it's it's a hypothetical question, so I can't really answer it.
But hypothetically, you would be okay with even that? Is that what you're opening the door to? Rape?
No, I'm just saying I would have to wait and see the circumstances to make that judgment.
So just to be clear for our audience, that was Jerry Falwell Jr. saying that he couldn't definitively say he would stop supporting Donald Trump if he was accused of rape.
Well, of course, I knew Jerry Falwell Jr. when he was a young man because I spoke at his father's church at Liberty Baptist when I was in the religious right myself. And if you had told Jerry Falwell Sr. that his son would be talking this way 30-some years after Falwell Sr. formed the, quote, moral majority, he would have been shocked. But the fact is, Joy, where we are this morning is not that Trump sleeps with, has sex with porn stars, or that this is the problem. The problem is his policies, his racism, his bigotry, his hatred, separating families, grabbing 7-year-old little girls away from their mothers, saying that he's going to nuke people. Forget all the porn star president stuff for a minute. That's just a good handle on how far these evangelical self-righteous people or the Laura Ingrahams of this world will go. The real issue is his policies toward the least of these, that in this epiphany of wisdom, Jesus held up as those we should treasure and mark and judge a civilization by how they treat these folks. So when you're living in a country where a black man can be shot with impunity and nothing happens to the police force that does it, we have a problem. And when you're living somewhere where the dreamers are being separated from their families, we have a problem. That's Christians have denied Jesus this Easter.
It is Monday, the 2nd of April of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays, because it is the day after Easter Sunday. Oh, indeed. Well, quite a weekend, not just because it was a holiday, and not because of the live production of Jesus Christ Superstar. No, not because of that, though that was part of it. But because you have a president of the United States who apparently doesn't trust his intelligence community enough to get information from them, he'll get it directly from Fox News, or Fox News as told by Stephen Miller. And that is why one Donald J. Trump has no idea how DACA works, what DACA is. The main thing is that it's full of, well, brown people. And we can't have that. Because it is, well, if you got a white house, the rest of it must be pretty darn white too. Well, I have no idea what's going on in this Donald J. Trump's mind. Well, actually, I have an idea, but I don't know. Let's just say I'm polite in my critical thinking. Ha ha ha! What a joke that is. Polite. Well, Frank Schaeffer wasn't very polite, especially to the people who brung him, because he is the son of Francis Schaeffer, one of the people that started the Right Wing Evangelical movement as we know it today. And Frank Schaeffer, saw it for what it is. And I got to hand it to the younger Schaeffer. He had a moment of moral clarity, and that moral clarity didn't jibe with the hypocrisy that the adults around him were perpetuating. And he has been on a crusade? Yeah, he's been on a crusade to expose the right-wing white evangelical movement for what it is. And it's an absolutist theology that's impossible to argue with, and there's no room for critical thinking. And let's be clear, when they talk about the halcyon days of William F. Buckley Jr., when you had true intellectuals, William F. Buckley Jr. was a unmitigated, out-and-out bigot racist. Okay? Come on. The Republican Party became what it is today because of the likes of a William F. Buckley Jr., whose pseudo-intellectualism, sure, he had a great debating style. He went to all the best schools. But let's just presume that maybe the moral center was a bit lacking. Maybe that wasn't as well developed. The autopsy, private autopsy of Stephen Clark has come back, and the exact opposite of everything that the cops said. So, and then during a protest, the cops ran over a grandma, younger than me, so what does that make me? But a 56-year-old woman, not a spring chicken by any means, ran her right over and then sped away, a hit and run. Of course, the reasoning is that they were so afraid, they were surrounded by protesters, they were pounding on the car, and the back window was broke. I think the back window was broke after they hit the lady and then left the scene of a crime. Okay? So when the cop car gets back to the precinct house, the one with the broken window in the back, that's the one that ran over the lady. And those guys, maybe they got to be looked into. And they will. And I don't know, maybe something will come of it, maybe something won't. One thing that we need to know about Sacramento, where Stephen Clark lived, is on literally the other side of the tracks. And there has been simmering racial animosities and tensions percolating for decades and decades and decades. And, it's not a wonder that this case is shaking out the way it is. Okay, well, what are we going to deal with today? Because we have curated some stories for you out of the abundance of news out there. We have to synthesize it down a bit, don't we? Yes, we do. Well, of course, that was Frank Schaeffer at the top. And on the rest of the menu, Trump supported the sham Honduras election that spurred the caravan of migrants marching through Mexico. Yeah, the caravan, there's I don't know, a couple of thousand people walking from Honduras to America. And we'll get into the reasons why and some of the particulars. But Stephen Miller and Fox News and Trump got it in their heads that, on Easter Sunday, what better way to celebrate, the ascension is to attack those who Jesus said we should be protecting and put foremost in all of our activities. And I guess they are fulfilling that religious edict, because brown people are foremost on their minds, and they are doing something about it. Trump wants out of Syria, but the Pentagon has no freaking idea what he's talking about. And Republican House Intel Committee is unaware its own findings that they released contradict Jared Kushner's written testimony. Yeah, maybe it was a typo. After the break, we'll move to the chef's table, where Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross is either seriously misinformed on how the Census Bureau works or doesn't care. Could be both. And the Chief Justice of the United States of America has no clue how elections work. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is the chat room link, and Kelly Lincoln, our roaring girl, monitors that throughout the day. So if you do have any questions, concerns, requests, etc., you can direct them there, and Kelly will get back to you. Or you can also follow us on Twitter at Netroots Radio. We're on Facebook, and so try us there. To the leftish of that chat room link at the bottom of our homepage are the contribute donate buttons. So thank you for your generosity. It pays the bills, and that's very important. And once again, thank you for your generosity on that. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I also post show notes and links for all the stories curated and even more on Daily Kos, and you can find me as Justice Putnam, and it's under the Justice Department, by the way, so you can look for it that way too. Okay, and let's see. Podcasts of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy can be had by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. And don't forget, music is provided by, here on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, is provided by Frances Livings. And she's down in Southern California, so check out her shows. And go to my show notes and links diary on Daily Kos, and there are links to her work where you can peruse and or purchase. All right. So starting off here, our first story about the caravan of migrants. Well, I think they're really refugees is what they are. I should have put in, instead of migrants, they're refugees. But, the law of unintended consequences can rear its ugly head even more vociferously if the person who made the unintended consequence occur had no idea what the heck he's talking about or what he's doing. And that fits this president to a T. When you have surrounded yourself with people like a Stephen Miller, and you're getting your intel from Fox News. This is an article by Martin Sismer out of Raw Story. Donald Trump and Fox News are freaking out about a caravan of migrants making their way north through Mexico. Trump alleged that the caravan was trying to take advantage of DACA. That's not true, as DACA does not cover people who come to the U.S. now. They had to come when they were little kids, and they've lived here forever, and that's all that they know. But DACA has some brown people in it, and brown people are wanting to come here, and obviously brown people are bad. Just ask Stephen Miller. I mean, he was on a tear for when he was trying to get rid of the Hispanic janitor at Santa Monica High. He took out petitions. Okay. Rather, the march was organized by a group called Pueblos Sin Fronteras, which supports international workers' rights and open immigration for jobs. But 80% of the marchers are from Honduras, and many of them were inspired by the sham election. According to a BuzzFeed reporter embedded with the caravan, they often chant "out with JOH," referencing Juan Orlando Hernandez, the nation's conservative president. Hernandez won an election that Organization of American States said was so deeply flawed that a new election was needed to produce a fair and transparent outcome. Uproar over the election led to protests in which Hernandez's security forces fired on civilians, killing scores. Didn't hear about that, did you? Well, they're brown people, and it's another country, and no Americans died in it, so it didn't really matter now, did it? Trump, who supports authoritarian strongmen in China and Russia, would not support the OAS determination or pressure the nation to hold a new election, so Hernandez remains president. That is one of the reasons marchers set off from Tapachula in southern Mexico. They are bound for the U.S. through the route, though the route has not been announced and may remain flexible. So this caravan is actually Hondurans fleeing this authoritarian regime, which is anathema to Trump, Stephen Miller, and Fox News. Because if you're fleeing from an authoritarian regime, that must mean that you are the wrong one, and you should be made to suffer. And if you think that your life is in danger from the country that you're fleeing from, wait till you get here. Next offering here at the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Ash Mondays, is Out of Think Progress by D. Pervaz. Totally countering his Secretary of Defense, General James Mattis, Donald Trump said on Thursday that the U.S. is on its way out of Syria. We'll be coming out of Syria like very soon. Let the other people take care of it now. Very soon, we're coming out, said the so-called president while giving a speech in Ohio. That was one of his Nuremberg rallies. He has to have these Nuremberg rallies to prop up his ego. He loves that. Now, ABC reported that the Pentagon did not see it coming, referring all questions on the statement to the White House. General Mattis has been pretty clear that, in his opinion, the U.S. has an open-ended mission in Syria. The State Department was also blindsided, with spokeswoman Heather Nauert saying, "I have not seen the president's comments myself. I don't know the context in which his comments were said, but I can say that, as a general matter, this administration looks to other countries to help out." She doesn't know the context of the comment because it was made within the context of one of those Nuremberg rallies where he just spontaneously riffs on the world as he sees it. Tapped to be the next Secretary of State pending Senate approval, Mike Pompeo told Face the Nation earlier this month that while he would leave policy to others, countering Iran's influence in Syria was crucial. Iranian and Russian support of the government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has been vital to the regime, with the U.S. increasingly viewing its presence in Syria as an anti-Iran operation as much as anything else. His predecessor, now that's Pompeo, Rex Tillerson, was also in favor of remaining in Syria for the same reason and was no stranger to being caught off guard by Trump's tweets. Nicholas Harris, fellow at the Center for New American Security, working in the Middle Eastern Security Program, said that Trump will have a hard time pulling away from Syria in the interest of not giving his political opponents anything to use against him, while trying to expand the range of U.S. activities against Iran in the broader Middle East. Well, why not send Jared? The Trump administration might walk away from the 2015 nuclear arm deal with Iran, impose more sanctions, increase pressure on European and Gulf Arab allies to cut off lifelines, and to take a tougher stance against Iran. Well, that's going to push him to exactly the kind of conflict they want now, won't it? The Trump administration is not offering anything new. It wants to do something militarily against Iran, but it wants U.S. partners to do something militarily against Iran. But those partners, such as Israel and the Gulf Arab states, won't do that unless the U.S. is there with them in the trenches, said Harris. So it's a circular type of rhetoric. He said that leaving Syria now would mean the complete collapse of the counter-ISIS effort, and particularly the preventative counter-terrorism effort, which has to do with stabilizing the areas that have been taken back from ISIS. You'll see a resurgence of ISIS because the Assad government and its partners are still in a largely weakened position, and their ability to exert security, control, government administration is much beyond western central Syria is quite limited, said Harris. So, as Trump worries about the Syrian war becoming his Iraq war if he pulls U.S. troops out, Syria might well become his Afghanistan when a U.S. troop withdrawal in the 80s gave rise to the Taliban. Still, Harris thinks that most of what Trump was saying was campaigning and signaling to his base that he didn't want to spend more money on the war in his signature rhetorical off-the-cuff way. And Harris points out the president's use of very soon as a timeline leaves things very vague. If the Trump administration is still banking on the pendulum theory, or the shifting momentum between Assad and his allies in the opposition, and the U.S. is not there to secure the gaps created by the pendulum swinging away from Assad, another actor will step in to do so. It won't be Turkey, because it lacks a capability, as do local partners. So large areas will once again be open to an ISIS resurgence. This is where there's no easy give it to Assad answer. Finishing up here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is an article out of Just Security by Ryan Goodman. Jared Kushner and his attorneys likely did not enjoy something they read when the House Intelligence Committee released its findings on the Russian election interference last Thursday. The report, drafted by Chairman Devin Nunes and supported by only GOP members of the committee, has become yet another instance of a failure of bipartisan investigations on the Hill. Even one of the leading members of the committee, Republican Trey Gowdy, acknowledged that Americans should not have confidence in the report's conclusion that there was no evidence of a Trump campaign collusion, and should have confidence in what Mueller's investigation produces instead. And Gowdy said that on Fox, and that was yesterday, Easter Sunday. Gowdy recently announced his retirement from Congress, citing his distaste for hyper-partisanism in his line of work. What? Trey Gowdy is upset about hyper-partisanism? That's rich, considering that he's still trying to get some investigations into Hillary. Huh. And that's the other thing. Republicans on this committee want to stop the Russian investigation because they still got some work that they've spent years on with Hillary. Unbelievable. Well, when Kushner read the report's finding number 32, he was surely disappointed. That's because the committee's stated conclusion contradicts Kushner's written statement to Congress concerning the important June 9th meeting with Russians in Trump Tower. Well, that line in the committee's findings is generally consistent with what Trump Jr. told Congress he expected to receive at the meeting, and is highly inconsistent with what Kushner told Congress. Now, Finding 32 said that Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort attended that June 9th meeting at Trump Tower, where they expected to receive but did not ultimately obtain derogatory information on candidate Clinton from Russian sources. But that's not what Kushner wrote to Congress. He denied that he knew that the June 9th meeting was going to be about. That's at least the most plausible, if not universal, understanding of what Kushner wrote. Even the most charitable reading of Kushner's statement is that he did not directly and unequivocally state he had no foreknowledge of the meeting's purpose, but that he nevertheless sought to leave the clear impression with Congress and the public that he did not know the purpose of the meeting before attending. Kushner's statement, for instance, goes to great lengths to establish that he did not read the contents of Trump Jr.'s email setting up the meeting until it was shown to him by his lawyers. But that's contradicted with Kushner's statement, and Finding 32 is so stark, and the Nunes investigation so biased, that it is theoretically possible the discrepancy could be boiled down to a drafting error on the part of the committee. Another alternative is that among the 44 findings, the GOP members did not realize one of these materially differed from Kushner's specific account. The implication is fairly clear. There's a high likelihood Kushner submitted statements of fact that the House committee has determined to be false, perhaps without the GOP committee members realizing the contradiction, because they could tear it down, but they don't know how to govern. The federal crime of intentionally making false statements to Congress is written broadly, and it applies to anyone who knowingly and willfully falsifies, conceals, or covers up by any trick, scheme, or device a material fact, or two, makes any materially false, fictitious, or fraudulent statement or representation. There is no question that Kushner was seeking to create an understanding that he did not know the purpose of the Trump Tower meeting. As long as the committee's finding remains, the burden is on Kushner to explain a statement which he and his lawyers decided to release to the public. The best and the brightest, aren't they? Okay, let's get to our break, and we'll come back and meet up at the chef's table, go through the weather from around the world, and then we'll finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. During the last ice age, the northern half of North America was blanketed by ice. But along the Pacific coast of Canada, some land remained bare. It was a place where animals and plants could thrive, and humans too. Archaeologists have found stone tools and cave sites 12 to 13,000 years old in the coastal Pacific Northwest. One find was a mastodon rib with a bony weapon in it. And now scientists at the Hakai Institute and the University of Victoria have made a spectacular discovery: clay soil trampled by human feet, the oldest footprints uncovered in North America. Researchers were digging several feet below a modern-day beach on British Columbia's Calvert Island, about 250 miles northwest of Vancouver, when they discovered the tracks. They found 29 in all. Some had toes, arches, and heel prints, indicating the people who left them were probably barefoot. And using a shoe-size measurement chart, similar to the kind you find in a shoe store, they determined that the footprints likely belonged to a child and two adults, who lived and walked the area some 13,000 years ago. The results are in the journal PLOS ONE. The tracks are not in a line, like the famous Latoli footprints in Tanzania. Instead, they're facing different directions, suggestive of people gathering. Or perhaps the author's right, they could be the footprints of people getting out of a boat, headed towards higher and drier land, still on the move. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. James Madison's strong belief in religious freedom is evident in his drafting of the U.S. Bill of Rights. He had originally opposed adding a Bill of Rights to the Constitution because he doubted the effectiveness of mere paper barriers to tyranny, and because he did not see a need for such formal guarantees in a government limited to enumerated powers. He had promised his Baptist friends and others, however, that he would work for the addition of a Bill of Rights if the Constitution were adopted. He also became convinced that a formal Declaration of Rights would widen support for the new Constitution and would help the nation's courts protect the rights of minorities against majority encroachments. Almost single-handedly, Madison worked through the summer of 1789 to draft and secure agreement on the measure, overcoming the apathy and skepticism of congressional colleagues and working out an acceptable draft from among many proposals required all of Madison's political skills. Though many among the framers could claim to have had a hand in fathering the Constitution, the Bill of Rights was primarily Madison's offspring. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. North and South Korea have set a date for face-to-face talks between their two leaders, April 27th. That's when Kim Jong-un, fresh off a visit to Beijing, his first international trip as supreme leader, will meet with South Korea's President Moon Jae-in, the man widely credited for shifting the North Korea crisis from the realm of escalating military threats last year to increasingly serious diplomatic dialogue this year. The two men will hold their meeting at a compound within the demilitarized zone separating the two countries. Face-to-face talks to help prepare for the leadership summit are already underway, with more working meetings scheduled for next week. There's still no word about a possible date or location for a proposed meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. And the National Hockey League, or NHL, is sounding the alarm about climate change. In a new report this week, the league, which represents 24 teams in the U.S. and 7 teams in Canada, said climate change could dramatically shrink the length of the outdoor skating season. Looking at ice data and climate simulations in 4 Canadian cities, the NHL said, quote, in coming decades, the average length of the skating season may shrink by 1/3 in eastern Canada and by 20% in western Canada.
It really goes into the development of the sport.
Dr. Brian McCullough is an assistant professor in the Sport Administration and Leadership program at Seattle University.
If you don't have young players or even middle-aged and older players playing on ponds, they're not going to be playing the sport. And so from a business standpoint, that could potentially hurt the development of future fans, but also future players for the sport, whether it be in the NHL or in other parts of the world.
To try and reduce its environmental footprint, the NHL is encouraging teams to install LED lights at their stadiums, reduce water usage on and off the ice, and to try and help fans get to the game in more sustainable ways. Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Our daily special, of course, is River City Ash Mondays. And now that we're very comfortable here, we'll go through weather from around the world, and we'll begin along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America. Weather Underground seems to be lagging just a tad today, so might take a little bit longer to give the weather because I have to go to a few individual cities because forecast is not showing up on my ledger. But they are showing up at the actual city, and I'm not getting all the data that I need here along the banks of the Rogue River. What the heck? So I've looked around for other nearby weather stations, but a couple of them are too far away and just don't give an accurate reading to what I would have here. Well, currently, Weather Underground says I'm at 36 degrees, though my thermometer here on the grounds of the mothership in Rogue River says that it is 40 degrees. We're going to be a tad cooler than yesterday with a high of 57. We went up to 65 yesterday, though over the weekend, not counting yesterday, we were, Friday and Saturday, we were in the mid-70s. It was quite pleasant. Lows are going to be dipping down into, they say the mid-30s, and then we'll be inching up in temperature for the days ahead. No data on air quality. I've sent a report to the Weather Underground. Hopefully we can get a weather station that will give us those readings once again. Pressure is steady at 30.05 inches. Visibility is 8 miles. Humidity is 74%. Though it did, it rained or sprinkled last night because everything had a wet sheen everywhere. It was quite lovely this morning. All right, so weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these personal weather stations that they purchased somewhere on their property, and these people live around the world. London is 49 degrees with a rain shower. Paris is 61 and sunny. No data for Rome. How dare you? Oh, if I do it, I know it's going to happen, but we'll do it anyway. Let's see. Rome is loading, and here we go. Come on, Rome. Keep loading. Rome doesn't want to load. Well, be that way. Okay, so no data on Rome. Hong Kong is 69 and clear. Tokyo is 60 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is no data. San Francisco, California is 51 and partly cloudy. And New York is 32 degrees with light snow. Well, that's New York for you in the spring. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people live around the world. Starting off here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is I just got to tell you, it's immaterial to me whether Wilbur Ross is conveniently misinformed or doesn't care. Both are obviously troubling scenarios. What is important to me is that the expertise of a Wilbur Ross. Now, I know he's Commerce Secretary, but Commerce, usually in our form of government, doesn't also include money laundering. I mean, normally. It's not as if it was unheard of, but it usually isn't actual policy. And I think Wilbur, because of his banking expertise, thinks that money laundering is policy. And when you're laundering money, you really don't want the facts out now, do you? This is an article by Jennifer New out of Common Dreams. The decennial census is a high-stakes feat. It informs government spending, business planning, and congressional apportionment. No wonder the Census Bureau takes such great pains with each question. After all, when you ask only 10 questions or so, you've got to make them count. You can almost hear the bureaucratic hand ringing in the agency's request for public comment. How should we word questions about race and Hispanic origin? Can we gather this information effectively through handheld computers or through the internet? How will our dress rehearsals for collecting all this data go? For good reason. The Bureau engages in extensive survey pre-testing during the decade before showtime. Census staffers must be an anxious lot. One wonders then how Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, in a memorandum directing the Bureau to include a question on citizenship, could puzzle about whether a mechanism exists for learning about possible non-response rates. He is either seriously misinformed about how the Census Bureau usually works, or, more troubling, he just doesn't care. Ross's claim that testing from the Long-Term American Community Survey, which already contains a citizenship question, is good enough, but also stretches credulity. You don't have to be an expert demographer to know that different surveys with different functions, contents, formats, lengths, consequences, and visibilities are going to produce different response rates. The point of all this, however, is not to wade into survey methodology, but instead to consider what is happening at the Census Bureau from the perspective of administrative law. Okay, like any agency, the Bureau is subject to the Administrative Procedure Act, the APA, as well as lesser-known statutes like the Paperwork Reduction Act and the Data Quality Act. The APA requires that agencies refrain from acting in ways that are arbitrary and capricious. Put differently, agencies must give credible reasons for their decisions grounding in expertise. It has to be grounded in expertise. But Wilbur's expertise really isn't, what we would consider to be normal government or even business practice. They do things a little bit different in Cyprus, and they do it even more different in Crete. Courts should try to smoke out politicized intent unmoored from the available evidence or lack thereof. Different judges can disagree on what these signals are, but in this case, they could take their pick. Violations of an agency's own internal standards and procedures. Something is usually amiss when an agency doesn't follow up its own procedures. That's the premise of, at least of the so-called Accardi doctrine. When an agency constrains its own discretion, it's legally obligated to operate accordingly. To be sure, the doctrine has the most bite when the agency has tied its own hands through a legislative rule, the violation of which results in third-party harm. But courts have often applied Accardi even in cases where the agency has issued an internal manual or other less formal means of commitment. Now here, the Census Bureau's own Methodology and Standards Council has promulgated statistical standards that explicitly apply to the decennial census. So a statement of the most minimal standard for census questions. So basically the minimum standard, does the questionnaire work? That's pretty much what it gets down to. So evaluated accordingly. Deciding to include a question about citizenship without engaging in any pre-testing seems to violate the Bureau's own standards for new questions. While this failure may not rise to the level of an actual Accardi violation, the fact that the Bureau is not following its own publicly available guidance is highly suspicious. So, like lack of Senate-confirmed appointees. Now, often when a political appointee of a parent agency like Commerce attempts to act in a highly politicized way, the head of a more expert sub-agency, here that would be the census director, would have to step in. And they'll have to go toe-to-toe with old Wilbur. And, Congress has delegated the final decision-making power here to the Commerce Secretary, but the institutional reputation of census is also on the line. And census directors usually care. Why isn't that internal check being exercised here? The Senate has lacked a Senate-confirmed director since last June. Feature, not a bug. You know this. So, what it gets down to is surveying the signals of when an agency is doing something or not doing something should send up, some alarm bells. One can't help but think that the Commerce Department's decision was motivated by something other than the evidence before it. After all, the failure to collect evidence itself is usually a sign that some other motive besides expertise is at play. But this would not be the first time a judge has had to disentangle pretext from reality. And when a court is called upon to do so here, it would do well to remember that where there is smoke, there is usually fire.
Dansez maintenant sous l'été, les pieds nus dans le sable. Dansez maintenant et jetez vos ennuis dans les vagues qui dansent.
All right, finishing up here at the Chef's Table of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays, is Out of Think Progress by the great Ian Millhiser. Now, the guy who said that America isn't racist enough to keep the Voting Rights Act also believes some very odd things about gerrymandering. The Chief Justice of the United States is allergic to political science. He harbors numerous misconceptions about how voters behave and how they think, and these misconceptions often form the basis for his judicial decisions. With Chief Justice John Roberts poised to become the Supreme Court's crucial swing vote, if any of the 5 justices to his left leave court, these misconceptions could soon weave themselves into the way the court interprets the Constitution. The laws governing America's elections, our right to choose our own leaders rather than having them chosen for us, could soon bend to one man's weak understanding of how elections work, and to a large extent they already have. Roberts' confusion was most recently on display during Wednesday's oral arguments against Benesek versus Lamone, a Supreme Court case challenging Maryland's gerrymandered congressional maps. Early in the argument, Maryland's Solicitor General Stephen Sullivan claimed that his state was split about 60-40 between Democrats and Republicans, but that troubled Roberts, who wondered aloud about, the percentages of independents in Maryland. He wants to count independent voters, but of course, look, it's all well and good when you're doing it rhetorically. But the fact remains is that independent voters aren't independent voters. They vote either Democrat or Republican. So, basically what Roberts wants are congressional maps drawn so I guess there's independent districts or something. He doesn't have any understanding of what that how that makes no sense. So Justice Elena Kagan quickly pointed out this is a terrible misconception of what it means to be an independent voter. Most people who are independents tend to lean pretty strongly one way or the other over many election cycles, and she's right. Though a significant minority of Americans self-identify as independents, the vast majority of these tend to reveal a preference for one party or the other. And one analysis of independent voters found that those who identify as independents today are more stable in their support for one or the other party that were strong partisans back in the 70s. And this is study after study, and so, but we're in the know-nothing period. The people who know nothing know better than the actual science and facts. Now, in fairness to the Chief Justice, his misunderstanding of how self-described independents actually behave on Election Day is widespread. Political punditry analyzing whether independent voters as a bloc will prefer Democrats or Republicans is a mainstay of election year punditry. But Roberts isn't just some guy spouting nonsense on TV. He's the most powerful judge on the planet. And his misconceptions about independent voters are part of a much larger pattern, and I always say that's a feature, not a bug. Now, Millhauser cites Shelby County versus Holder, and as one of the misconceptions in the opinion that Robert set out. And, that's when counties had to pre-clear under the Voting Rights Act, whenever they made changes. But, according to Roberts, we're not racist enough anymore to have to do with anything to do with the Voting Rights Act. But Roberts held in Shelby County that America no longer needs this shield over our elections. In an opinion Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg likened to throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet, Roberts proclaimed that things have changed dramatically in the U.S. since the Voting Rights Act became law. Blatant discriminatory evasions of federal decrees are rare. Really now. The guy needs to get out some. So McCutcheon and versus FEC is referenced as well. So the core of the plaintiff's argument in Whitford, another case cited here, is a mathematical formula that can be used to identify maps that were likely drawn to advantage one party or the other. It's not an especially difficult formula to follow or to understand, and it deals with cracking and packing. And apparently Chief Justice Roberts has never heard of those terms before. I mean, did the guy never get out? So he doesn't understand the mathematics. Actually, it's just arithmetic. He thinks that the arithmetic is akin to sorcery. And he worried that it's so confusing that voters would lose faith in it. He cited the average intelligent guy on the street would not understand what this arithmetic formula is. Okay. Intelligent man on the street is going to say that's a bunch of baloney, he believes. Well, Breyer wanted no part of this effort to present math as black magic, and he offered an even simpler answer to Roberts' intelligent man on the street. The reason why the Democrats should win in a case involving an aggressive Republican gerrymander, Breyer explained, is because if Party A wins a majority of votes, Party A controls the legislature. That seems fair. Yet for Roberts, this very basic insight proved elusive, as did the very basic facts about corruption, racism, and the way voters describe themselves. Roberts' record on the bench has demonstrated that he is also unlike his fellow Republican justices in some significant and interesting ways. For instance, he largely rejected the partisan lawsuit seeking to strangle Obamacare in its crib, and he has at times gone out of his way to warn fellow conservatives not to push for too much or else they will get burned by him. Roberts' views on elections, in other words, likely come from a place of genuine naivete. He knows not what he does. Unfortunately, Roberts also appears to have little interest in the things that he does not know. And if Trump gets to put someone else on the Supreme Court, Roberts will soon have the keys to the Constitution. Frightening indeed. That's almost as frightening as Sinclair Broadcasting, which has no control over us, so you're not hearing any fake news proclamations from here, because we'll have only real news throughout the whole day. Breaking news, of course. So stay tuned to Netroots Radio for the rest of the day. And we will visit with you tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.